The toolbar, or rather I should call it the main toolbar, is this area here you can see at the top of the screen. And this contains quite a lot of key icons for Macs. So probably the easiest thing for me to do is to run through them left to right, and I'll explain what each one does. And later, when I go into the tutorial, you'll probably get an understanding of these in a little bit more detail. Okay, starting on the left, we've got two icons which are related to each other. We've got undo and redo. What these allow you to do is, like in a lot of software, is to actually undo something that you've just done. So in this case, I'm going to scale the teapot on the y-axis, and I've made a mistake. Oops, didn't really mean to do that. So we can go up to the undo button, and we've just undone it. Oh, that was a mistake. I didn't actually intend to undo that. So again, you can go to the redo button and click on that, and it'll redo the action that you've just undone. If you right click on the undo button, it'll actually bring up a menu, and you can select and undo multiple actions. So in this case, it's using the default number of undos, which is 20. So if I select all of those, there we go, and undo that, it'll take us back to a point where the teapot was undistorted. So you can see it's a very powerful feature, being able to undo multiple levels. So that's pretty cool. To the right of the undo buttons, I should point out that the keyboard shortcut for undo is Control-Z. But as with many of the keyboard shortcuts in Macs, you can actually customize that to be whatever you want. Okay, to the right of the undo buttons is the select and link button. What this allows you to do is to basically create hierarchies in Macs where, as an example, you create a, let's say a gun, and you want to put an element on that gun, like a trigger. And what you want to happen is, when the gun is moved, you want the trigger to move with it. And to do that, you would use this tool to actually link the trigger to the gun. By doing this, you can create hierarchies. As an example, you can create hierarchies to represent the human body. You know, you could create a pelvis and then attach a spine to it, and then attach the spine, you could have the shoulders, and attach the shoulders, you have the arms, and so forth. And again, if you didn't want to use bones, which we'll come to later, you could create a human figure by linking objects together using the link tool. When you want to unlink a selection, you use the unlink tool. So basically, you select an object that's linked to another object, click on the unlink tool, and that object will become unlinked to that object. So it actually breaks the link on the current object that you have selected, or if you have more than one selected, on all those objects. So it's quite a powerful tool there. Okay, something that we'll come to later is space warps, and they're used to produce various effects, wind, rain, well, rather they be used, for instance, with particles to produce gravity, things like that. But they can also be used to distort objects, so they're actually quite a wide-ranging feature. But for instance, if you created a space warp and you wanted this teapot to be affected by it, you would click on the teapot, click on the bind to space warp, and then it will draw a line from the teapot, and then you can click on the space warp, and that space warp will then affect that teapot. So that's what this is for. Here we have the selection filter, and what that allows us to do is, if we have a complex scene and we have a number of different types of objects in it, we can actually limit what we can currently select by choosing one of these options here. So as an example, we've got lots of lights in our scene, let's say. We could say, I just want to select a sofa in the scene. So I could say, let's limit my selection to geometry, and then when I try to select any lights in the scene, I'd only be able to select the sofa, or, well, in this case, a teapot. Let me show you how that works exactly. I put on lights. There aren't any lights in the scene, so I can't actually select anything at the moment. There you go. So quite an important thing to actually check, I suppose. If you're trying to select objects in the scene, you can't select anything. Just check that you haven't turned on filters, selection filters. To the right of selection filters is the select objects icon. One of the things that can happen is when you actually select an object using this icon here, which is select and move. Oops, there we go. I forgot to put the filter back to geometry. let's do that. That's a good object lesson. In this case, I'm using select and move. If I select the teapot, you can see that immediately the transform gizmo becomes active. And this isn't always a good thing, because it may be that the teapot is actually exactly where you want it to be in the scene. You don't want to disturb it, so by turning on the select tool, you can purely just select an object and have no transforms active by default. So that's actually quite useful sometimes. Select by list tool, select by name tool. This actually brings up a list of all the objects in the scene, and this allows you to type in wildcards here. For instance, if you had 28 teapots, you could type in teapot and it would select all the teapots in your scene. It also allows you to select by type, select by color, select by size, and it also allows you to filter out objects in the scene. So if I filter none, and then add geometry, it'll only show me geometry in the scene. If I say lights, it'll only show me lights in the scene. So I haven't got any lights at the moment, so it doesn't really show anything. So let's put it back to all. A very useful tool, and it's used quite a lot, so it's something that you'll have to get used to pretty quickly. To the right of that is the method for selection. Now at the moment, if I want to select multiple objects, I can click on a part of the screen, drag, and you can see it creates a rectangular marquee. When I leave go, anything inside that marquee is selected. But on some occasions you don't want it to be a rectangle, so you can choose between a circle, or rather I should say ellipse. There we go. Oh no, it is actually a circle. So you can select everything inside a circle, which is actually quite useful sometimes when you're working with a circular object and you want to select, say, just a certain radius of that object or a certain radius of vertices. You can do a custom marquee. In this case it's a linear one, so you just basically draw, and to finish it you go back to the first point and it'll select everything inside there. Or you can do a freehand marquee. So in this case you just draw a custom curve, there we go, and anything inside that curve is selected. So again, pretty useful tools, which you might use on certain occasions if you want to get a certain selection. Like I said, it's very common to use those tools on very fine selections, maybe on vertices. So yeah, again, pretty useful tools. Then you have window crossing, or window, what are the two options? Window or window crossing, I think they're called. This is quite a fine distinction. What this basically does is, when you have a bunch of vertices, let me show you this on this object. I think it actually bears demonstration. Okay, now what this will allow me to do, if I do a selection here, actually let me do it with faces because it's much more relevant then. Okay, that's working. Now if I select a face and I only go halfway over a face, which you can see on these faces here, and I leave go, you can see that it doesn't select the faces. So that's the second option. With the first option, if I only semi-select a face, it will actually select it. So again, it depends on the circumstance that you're working on, whether you want to select everything only inside the window or anything that the window crosses, hence the name of the option. So let me just undo what I've just done there. Put the teapot back to a normal teapot. That's great. Okay, and to the right of these tools you can see you've got the three translation tools, and these basically correspond to the three translation tools that I showed you earlier. In other words, W is for transform, E is for rotation, and R is for scale. So you can see that as I'm pressing those keys, these icons are becoming active. To the right of the transform tools, you can see that you have the transform reference. Now this may need a little bit of explaining. I'll actually have to show this to you, otherwise it really won't make much sense. Each object in a 3D package has its own transform matrix, and basically what that means is that the world is one big transform matrix, and in this case is represented by this grid, and in the center of the world, which is at this point here, the intersection of the grid is 0, 0, 0 in X, Y, and Z. Now every object that you then create in the scene has its own transform matrix, and in this case you can see this teapot has got its own transform matrix, which is represented by this transform gizmo, And at the moment we're actually rotating this teapot relative to the world, relative to the view I should say. So if I do a rotation, you can see that the axis of this teapot appears to remain static. That is, the axis is running still along the world. But if I go to here and I change my reference to local, you can see that the axis of the teapot are actually altered. And if I rotate the teapot, you can see that the axes do actually change and stay relative to the teapot. This is in reality exactly what's happening. The rotation, translation, everything of this teapot is actually an offset from the center of the world. So when I actually rotate the teapot, it does actually maintain its own rotation, which you can see here. I'll change it to world, sorry, I'll change it to view, and you can see that it's actually relative to the world again. Screen, it actually becomes relative to the screen, so as I rotate around, you can see that the gizmo is actually based on the actual view that we have of the teapot, which can be useful sometimes if you want to rotate, say, the teapot on that axis. But in recent versions of Macs, it's pretty much become superseded by using the outer ring of the rotation gizmo, as that pretty much does the same kind of thing, so really not that useful, I suppose. Then you have parent, which is based on the parent of the teapot. If I link the teapot using the link tool over here to another object, then you can actually use the transform of the parent, and that has applications in various different situations, which we'll go into later. So for now, let's put it back to view. Something that can also happen with translations is that they're based on one point in space, which you can see here on the teapot. But what happens is, if you have actually two objects selected and you want to transform both of them, well, let's create a teapot, and I'll use this method, which I'll go into later. So there we go, I've got two teapots. I'm going to select them both using my marquee, and you can see that what Max has done is it's found an average point in the middle of the two teapots, and now if I rotate, you can see it's actually rotating the teapots around their common center, which is basically just a temporary solution to the situation that you have in Max. If I create a third teapot, which I'll use the same method again, move this teapot over here, there we are, created a third teapot. I do a selection, you can see again it's created a transform in the middle of the three teapots, and if I transform those teapots using that, it's based on that. This really becomes much more evident when you rotate the teapots. You can see they're all rotating around this common center. Let's say though that we wanted to transform the teapots around their own centers, and you can do that by changing the reference system using this option, and you can see that the icon basically suggests that it's using a pivot point on each object, and you can see they're all rotating around their own local axis. So again, that's pretty useful. And you can also have a common, there we go, which was the default, and you can also use transform coordinate center, and that allows you to rotate the teapots around the center of the world. So again, different applications for different situations. To the right of this is the manipulator activation button, which we'll go into possibly in this DVD. I'm not sure if I actually come to that, I think. But basically manipulators are... actually, let me just show you quickly because it's worth having a look at. If I create another teapot, oops. If I undo that, get rid of that. Okay, we've got a teapot there, which is actually a little bit tiddly. So let's make it substantially bigger. And I'll turn on manipulator mode, and you can see you've got a green circle. If I grab that, you can see I can actually scale the teapot. So this actually isn't scaling the teapot, I really shouldn't say that. It's actually changing the radius of the teapot over here, which is a basic creation parameter. So let's get rid of the teapot. Here we have the 3D snaps. These allow you to basically limit the way you select objects in the scene. As an example, there's a rotation snap, the angle snap. If I turn on rotation, you can see now that I can actually rotate the torus in steps of 5 degrees, which you can see here on this counter. If I go around there you go, you can see the counter stuck on 5-degree increments. If I turn it off and do it again, you can see that it's actually much finer, the control there. And turn that on, right click on it, you can see you can actually set up the angle snap there. So I'll put that up to 10, just change that to 10. There we go. And now if I rotate, have it actually turned on, might be useful. Now if I rotate, I'm limited to degree rotations of just 10 degrees. So a very useful tool, which especially the angle snap, I use that all the time. But it's the same thing for 3D snaps, percentage snaps. They're all very useful, and they use quite a lot when you're modeling. To the right of these tools, the snap tools, you have the selection set tool. Selection sets are basically a quick way of creating groups of objects, and they were more popular in Max. Well, actually they were the only system in Max previous to, I think it was Max 5. And if I create 2 tori and select the 2, and I'll create a selection set, and we'll call it my toroids. There we are. Press return, and now if I go here, you can see the selection set called my toroids. I select that, and they're both selected. So it's a quick way of basically, you know, getting groups of objects and being able to select them very quickly. This button actually allows you to go into the name selection set editor, which has a list of the selection sets, and you can open those up. You can take objects out of them, move them around, delete them. You're not actually deleting the objects, you're just removing them from that particular selection set. So it's a kind of rudimentary layer system, which has been superseded now pretty much by the new layer system in Max, so not really used that much anymore, but useful none the same with legacy files that you may get, where selection sets were the only method of organizing the scene, so it's quite useful to have that option. And to the right of the selection sets, we have the mirror tool, which isn't really that easy to demonstrate with a torus. So let's get rid of the torus, and let's create a teapot again. Really love my teapots. They're very useful as basic objects for render testing and you know, just doing basic tests in Max, dynamics, anything you want really. It's just nice to have a basic object which you can do some quite simple things with. So let's mirror it. Oof, there we go. It's mirrored it, and you can see it's brought up a little dialog which asks you which axis it should be mirrored on, so you can choose different axes, or you can do a combination of axes. That isn't really that evident what's happening there, but it's actually doing it on Z and X, or Y and Z, or X and Y. But because the teapot is actually pretty symmetrical, you don't really see that much difference from doing just single axes mirroring. You can also mirror the object and offset it off its axis. Let's just put that back to there. And you can also choose to mirror the object and copy it at the same time. So you could create a copy, you can see you've got the original and then you've got the copy, or you could create an instance or a reference. And you can also mirror IK limits, which is something that you'll come into later, as we will with copying and instancing and referencing, what those actually mean. So for now we'll cancel that and we'll go back to the original teapot. To the right of that tool we then have the align tool, and what this allows us to do, if I create another object, we'll create a box here. These two objects have their own axes, they have their own pivot points, you know, the center of which the object pivots around. And let's say we want to get this object and we want to snap it to the position of this object. Well, you do that with the snap tool. So you click on the snap tool, the align tool, you click on the target, and then it brings up a little dialog and you can choose exactly what it uses to align the two objects. So in this case we're going to do X, Y and Z position, and it's using the center of the two objects. In this case, well, most of the time actually you would probably want to use the pivot point. So now it's using the pivot points of the both objects to align the teapot to the cube, which is very useful. Now something else that you might do is you might have rotated the teapot. So let's cancel that and do that so we can show you in action what happens. So we'll do a world rotation and we'll move it up in the air and we'll align it to this object and we'll say X, Y, Z and we'll do the pivot points. And you can see they're now aligned. The pivot points are actually on exactly the same point, but you can see that the teapot is rotated whereas the cube isn't. So that the rotation axes of the transforms of the teapot are offset compared to the cube. So again, you can use the align tool to snap the axes together. So we'll do X, Y and Z, and now the teapot is aligned completely with the cube. As you can see, you've got options here for scale. So the same thing. If the teapot is at 100% scale in each of its axes, you can use that snap there to actually get the teapot to be the same scale in all the different axes as the cube. So a very useful tool which is used pretty often when you're working in Max. To the right of, actually let's hold down the button here. This is a common thing that you'll actually see in Max. If you look at these icons, you can see they've got little tabs here. And you saw earlier that I went here to choose the different options. This is used to denote that there's more than one option underneath that icon. And you can see, yeah, the same thing for the marquee types. So in this case, you can see you've got the align tool, you've got the normal array, normal align, which will actually get the teapot and, as far as I remember, will align it with the surface. But the normal on the surface, in other words, perpendicular to the surface. Or you've got lighting align. This will actually align a selected light to a facet on the surface and will basically guarantee that you get a highlight at that point, which is quite useful, but more for sort of classical lighting techniques rather than current techniques. Then we have align camera. To the right of the align tools, we have the layer manager. And if we open that up, you can see that we've got a default layer which everything in the scene is put under. So you can see that if we open it up, we've got the box and the teapot, and they're both in their own little they're both under the default layer. But let's say we wanted to have a bunch of teapots. So we'll move this teapot down here, and I'll move it over here a little bit and copy it. And again, okay. And I'll do the same thing for the cube. And again, and let's say we want to have two groups in the scene, two layers. One is called teapots and one is called cubes. So we select all the teapots and we go here and we say create a new layer, and we've created a new layer, and I'm going to rename that and call that teapots. Okay, great, we've created our little teapot layer. I'm going to do the same thing for the cubes. There we are, we create another layer, rename that cubes. Okay, great, we've got two layers, and if we open those up, we can see we've got the cubes in there, and if we open up this one, we can see we've got the teapots in here. And what we can actually do is we can hide all the elements in one of the layers at once. You can see you've got buttons here for hiding and freezing. So let's say we want to hide all the teapots. We click on this icon and we've hidden all the teapots. You can see the little icon turns up a little mask here to show that the teapots are hidden. Let's unhide the teapots. Let's say we want to freeze them. So I click on the freeze button, and you can see they're now all frozen. And what freezing does basically is makes an object in Max still be visible in the viewport, but you can't actually select it. No matter what you do, you can't select that object. And that's very useful when you're doing layout, or let's say, for instance, animating characters, and you don't want to select the table or the chair. You may just want to select the character. So what you can do in that circumstance is you can actually put the character in its own layer, put the table in its own layer, let's say the set, the walls, the chair, the set, everything in its own layer, and then you can just freeze the entire layer just by pressing on the freeze button there. Same thing for the cube, same thing, hide the cubes, so now they're hidden and frozen. So yeah, you can see we've got some pretty cool tools there. So let's just close that down. To the right of that we have the curve editor, which I'll briefly open just to give you a quick view of it. This is used for animating, and we'll come to that later, so we'll close that down for now. Just basically there's an icon there so you can access that. To the right of that you have the schematic view. We'll just open that briefly, and this allows you to see the relationships of objects in the scene. So as an example, what we'll do is we'll create a little bit more interesting relationship. I talked about the link tool earlier. Select this teapot, we'll link it to this teapot. We'll select this teapot, we'll link it to that teapot. Now you have a parent teapot. There we go. We've created a hierarchy, which is something I described earlier. And you can see that this is a child of this teapot, this is a child of this teapot. If I move the parent of all of them, they all move. If I move this one, only its child moves. If I move this one, none of the others move. So the child is lowest down the chain, and this is a common feature in other packages, and as I said, the link tool allows you to do that. We'll do the same thing for the boxes. We'll link the boxes together. Link there, and link there. And you can see as I'm doing this, the schematic view is updating. And what it's showing is that this box here is the parent of these boxes, and you can see that this teapot here is the parent of these teapots, and you can use various tools in here to actually modify your scene and the relationships with them. So we'll just close that down and go on to the next section. To the right of the schematic view, we have the material editor, which is something that we'll come to later. Basically, this is the editor that you'll use to edit all the materials in your scene. So it's something that you'll probably come to a lot, obviously, especially when you're texturing or rendering and lighting. So yes, a very important tool there. To the right of the material editor, we have the render scene, the render dialog, and as of Max 6, this was broken up into various tabs, which basically allow you to set up how you're going to render, to decide what renderer you're going to use. For instance, here you could choose to use a different renderer, let's say Mental Ray, which comes with Max 6 onwards. There we go, we could choose to use Mental Ray as the renderer. And when you update the renderer, these tabs actually update to offer the specific functionality of the renderer that you have currently selected. So let's put that back to the default scanline max renderer. There we go, and I'll show you a little bit more of that later. To the right of the render dialog, we have the render type, and this allows you to basically limit exactly what you're going to render in your viewport. For instance, you can just render the selected object, so let's try that and do a render, and you can see it's just rendered that teapot. Let's select the 3 teapots, and you can see it's rendered all 3 of the teapots. We'll select everything, and it's done everything. Let's say we're only interested in a part of the image, so I'll do another render again. I'll blank it, there we go, and we'll select it up to do a region. So do a render, Max asks for the region. In this case I just want to render this part of the image here, okay that, then Max only renders that part of the viewport. So that's very useful for when you're doing quite a heavy render and you just want to concentrate on a specific area, an area of particular interest that you're working on at the moment, or you're texturing, or you're very interested in the lighting in that particular area. So region's very useful for that. And you've got various other options here, crop and blow up. Blow up, for instance, will actually render a region, but actually it's like zooming in with a telescope almost. It'll just render that region but blow it up to actually fill the full view of the render. So some very useful options there. And as you saw to the right of the render types, we've also got the quick render button. So there we go, that's the main toolbar, and as you can see it's pretty packed. There's quite a lot of functionality there, so it'll probably take a while to get used to, but like I said, it's a pretty pivotal area of Max, so something that you'll obviously have to spend quite a bit of time getting used to there.